Hello everyone and welcome back to Fly From Home. It's Kitty again here with another Microsoft Flight Simulator add-on aircraft product review. And as you've already guessed, I'm sure, this one is going to be on the Carenado PA34T, better known as the Seneca 5. And as you can see it rotating around on the screen, I'm sure you'll agree it is an absolutely brilliant looking piston twin. What a sleek looking aircraft that is. So Carenado have very kindly once again donated this aircraft for us to review for free, so massive thank you to them. They were nice enough to give us the Turbo Skylane, and they've been nice enough to give us this too. So being lovers of free stuff that we are, we straight away have gone out and given this thing a fly round, and I feel reasonably in a position to talk a bit about this now with you and to give my opinions on it as a real-world flying instructor. A bit of a disclaimer before we start. I have never flown one of these in real life. I have a bit of experience in piston twins. Most of it, though, is in the DA42, which is a much more modern composite build four-seater aircraft. A little bit in the Duchess as well, which is an old, heavy four-seater twin, which is a little bit more like this, but certainly not in the same performance category. However, my current boss spent a lot of time in his at his last employer flying one of these, so I've heard plenty of stories and I've gathered plenty of information from him to know what this thing should fly like and how it should handle. So I'm going to be using his advice and information to help me deliver a verdict on this aircraft for you. Now, same format as we always do on these videos, so I'm going to start off with a little bit of history on the real aircraft. I'll put some timestamps in the video description so you can skip ahead if you're not interested about any particular part. But we're going to start off chatting about the real aeroplane. So this is an aeroplane from originally 1971, and essentially what it is a Piper, well, Saratoga really, Cherokee 6, but that's the Cherokee 6 is a fixed gear aircraft. It's a Saratoga with two engines, and the Saratoga is essentially a stretched out six-seater Arrow with a six-cylinder engine in it. So it's all coming back to the Arrow as always. Good old Piper. Essentially making an entire aircraft line just out of PA-28s. But this aircraft is very sort of substantially modified. You won't really see anything common with an Arrow, aside from maybe some little bits about the landing gear. The landing gear system is a little bit similar, and various other sort of minute technical details. But for the most part, this is a derivative, but almost entirely a new aircraft. It was intended to be kind of a cabin class cruiser, executive transport, that kind of thing. A bit of a step up from the Piper Seminole, which you'll remember I've reviewed before on this channel, which is much more geared towards flying schools. That said, flying schools do still use these aircraft, certainly in the UK, because of its ability to fend off ice. It's got a de-icing system, anti-icing system on board, and it's able to operate in up to moderate icing conditions, which makes it much more useful for operation in Northern Europe and certainly the UK than the Seminole, which doesn't have that kind of feature. Now, there have been obviously multiple different versions of the Seneca. This is the fifth one, which is the latest and greatest. I believe 1997 was when this came out. The original, obviously, like I said, 1971. And it's been through different engine variants and little aerodynamic tweaks here and there to make it faster and faster as the time has gone on and new equipment's been added to the aircraft. This is the latest and greatest, the fastest, the best performing out of all of them, although it does have slightly less usable load than the Seneca 3, because the Seneca 3 just has less equipment on board. It's a fast aeroplane. It's a very it's a high-performance aeroplane in comparison to something like the Seminole. So we're expecting to see some pretty high numbers. Obviously, I've got the pilot's operating handbook to hand as well to see how close it is to that. And yeah, so a bit of a training aircraft, but mostly a cabin class cruiser. I have seen a few of these knocking around in the UK because, like I said, some flying schools do use them. And overall, this is really one of my favourite aeroplanes to look at. I'd love to fly one of these in real life. I've just not been lucky enough to get the chance yet. Hopefully one day. So anyway, that's the Seneca. Great aeroplane, still in production today. So let's have a look at this representation of the Seneca in the simulator. So let's have a look at the external model first of all, as we always do. And I mean, I'm not going to dwell on this too much. I'm just going to show you, just so you can have a look for yourself. But as with all Carenado aeroplanes, really, the external model is absolutely brilliant. It looks exactly like the real aircraft, and the texture modelling is extremely good. Lovely reflections, and they've also sort of matted it down very slightly to make it look a bit more like a used aircraft than something that's just kind of come freshly polished out of the factory. There's a little bit of weathering on this one, which really does sort of bed it in to the world a little bit, I guess, for want of a better word. Bunch of different liveries, as always. All of them based on real-world aircraft, so they're not sort of invented colour schemes. They are real ones. Nice bit of forest green here. Lovely dark blue and white. Really like this one. Very nice dark red. This is an interesting one because it's got almost like a semi-matte upper surface. This sort of black upper surface is matte. You can see the difference in the shiny rear fuselage, white rear fuselage, and the matte forward and the tops of the cowlings, which is cool to see. And interestingly enough, a fully white version here. If you're not a fan of bright colours, you can become a complete NPC and and go full white. So cool, nice little offering of liveries. I'm going to put the blue one back on because I just like looking at it. So yeah, good liveries as always. Fantastic external model as always. Very interesting looking aeroplane. You can see the pneumatic de-icing boots on here and all sorts of things like the little icing light, which for some reason there's only one on this aeroplane, which is quite strange. You'll also notice all of these little antennas, well, static wicks, ELT antenna and all things like that are all very nicely modelled and also animated, which I'm going to show you once we are in flight. So let's have a quick look inside. We'll do this out in the sim, in the real sim lighting as well, so I'm not going to dwell too long on this in here. But as you can see, this is a analog instrument panel rather than a G1000. So all of you lovers of old-fashioned instrument panels rejoice. This is not a flying computer. It is an old-fashioned aeroplane with steam gauges. So very nicely modelled. Some of these gauges, I think, are just sort of swapped over from some of the other Carenado aeroplanes. But then again, I was probably thinking about the Seminole, and the Seminole's another Piper aircraft, so it's more than likely that these gauges are used on both aircraft, so I'm not going to pull them up too much about that. Nav systems that we've got a 430 and a 530. Both of these Microsoft default, so unfortunately no custom avionics in these aircraft, but it's kind of what we've come to expect from Carenado. They are workable, and they are getting better as time goes on. I heard from somewhere that the guys behind the working title mods are now working on these avionics for Microsoft. So I'm guessing that these are going to get quite a lot better soon, which is it's quite good. So it should be nice. It's going to bring a welcome buff to all of the aircraft that use the default avionics. You can also see there's a custom Autopilot, which is the same one used in the Seminole, I believe the Mooney as well. A nice little comms panel here. And transponder, again, same one used in the Mooney, but there's quite a few custom bits in here. The little instrument display here, which is very cool, little digital one, which I'll show you once we're airborne. NDB display, not NDB, sorry, DME display here. Autopilot, mode control, mode display, panel, flight mode enunciator, I guess, over here. And also a weather radar, which does work. It's just the default Microsoft Flight Simulator weather radar, which is a bit sort of trigger happy on painting thunderstorms all over it, even when you're just going through a random cloud. But it works, and it adds a lot of immersion and sort of systems depth to the aeroplane. So I really appreciate them doing that. And this is a little custom bezel that they've made for it. So yeah, very nice. Little ADF down there. And as you can see, the quality of the cockpit is absolutely spot on. There's no surprise here. The textures are fantastic, and there's a lot of animated stuff in here. Sun visors, tray tables, all sorts. If I go back, without phasing through the wall, you can just see just how nice everything is, even in the passenger compartment back here. And you can fold that tray table out when you're actually sat in the sim. Be careful not to hit that, though. That's the door handle, and if the door opens in flight, you just instantly die. So try to avoid that. But yeah, very, very impressive interior and exterior model, as you'd expect. So without wasting too much more time, let's get into the sim and have a look how it looks in there. Okay, boring bits over. We are now in the simulator with our usual default review flight ready to go. So if it's your first time on the channel, I'll just explain to you what we usually do to review these aircraft. We always do the same flights. It's Doncaster to Nottingham in the UK, with the weather set fully to default. So it's going to be 15 degrees, ISA standard atmosphere. 2 degrees per 1,000 feet, getting colder as we go higher, no weather, and still wind. So we can assess the aircraft in as close to control conditions as we possibly can. The aircraft is set up at its maximum takeoff weight, because that is what the aircraft performance documents are calibrated to be accurate to. So as is quite common with aircraft climb performance documents, they give you it at maximum all-up weight, so that you know what the worst case scenario is, basically. So we've set our aircraft up almost completely full of fuel. Strange thing to note, actually, with this aircraft, if you fill it up completely, you can only take 2 passengers on board. So that's an interesting thing to note. If you want to take 6 passengers, you have to reduce the amount of fuel that you're carrying. So if you want full endurance, you can only take 2 people. Quite interesting, given that this is a quite high-performance airplane. Anyway, so that's the aircraft situation and the situation we've got in the sim. Let's have a quick look at everything. Now we've got the natural lighting in the simulator, and as you can see, everything's looking very nice indeed. We've got all the external elements attached. We've got the little cones, the chocks, the very beefy looking tow bar, and the blanking intake plugs, pitot cover. All these things pretty much come as standard with all Carenado aeroplanes. Looks very nice, just adds a little bit to the immersion. You can see that the nose cargo compartment is open, and the rear cargo compartment door, and also the rear door, and the front door as well, which is just on this side. So unlike most Piper aeroplanes that only have a door just on the right-hand side for entry and exit, this aircraft is a little bit more civilized. It's got a entry point is the rear like this, which is basically, it's because the fuselage is exactly the same as the Saratoga, and the Saratoga has the same sort of setup as well. So it's a little bit more comfortable, and as you can see, the lovely club seating in the back there, facing each other. Have a look inside now. As you can see, everything's nice and lit up, and you can see some of the weathering that they've got on this panel. They've certainly gone to an effort to make it look a little bit more lived in. You can see a little bit more dirt in the corners of the windows and things like that to make it a bit more immersive, I guess. So yeah, pretty good. All of these things are controlled by the little iPad that you get. This is another standard Carenado thing in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So we'll pop all of our external elements off, assuming we've done our walk around. Close the door, and we'll get our pilot and co-pilot sitting in place and ready to go. So, without further ado, We'll just make sure we can actually taxi out of this bay. Yeah, we can. Should have enough space to spin it around. And we'll start going through the checklist. So, little quick note on the documentation. The aircraft does come with a full normal procedures checklist and an emergency procedures checklist. It also comes with a couple of performance documents. So, they will give you a power settings table, which is important, because there's quite a few different power settings you can choose to use once you are in the cruise. And it also comes with a cruise performance setting to tell you what sort of TAS you should be achieving at various different altitudes and power settings. However, it does not include all of the climb performance graphs, which I am going to be showing you as part of this review. That's from the Real Aircraft Pilot's Operating Handbook. As are the checklists that they're using as well. I believe that they're lifted straight from the Real POH, but I'll be using a Real checklist as well for this. So there may be some differences if you're using the Carenado version. So, without further ado, let's get cracking with this. So, one more thing about the iPad. You can use it to select a default setup for the cockpit, and you also have a takeoff checklist and a pre-landing checklist here. So very nice, very handy to have that on hand instead of having to sort of tab out or have it on your phone or your tablet or something, as I've got here with the checklist. So that's good. So before starting engine checklist is pre-flight check completed, flight planning completed. You know where we're going. Aft cabin doors closed and secure. Forward cabin doors closed and secure. And we can see that they are now all buttoned up and ready to go. Seats adjusted and locked, yeah, happy with that. Seatbelts and harnesses, yeah. Empty seats, yeah. Alternators, so that's interesting. You turn the alternators on before you turn the battery on. The parking brake is set, that's down here. Gear selector is there, and it is gear down. It might look like these are actually on while everything is off. I assure you they aren't. They will sort of get brighter when they turn on. They just look a little bit bright when they're off. Throttles set to idle, which they are. Propeller controls, so check the blue levers are all the way forward. Mixture or fuel flow in the idle cut-off position. Now I'm going to select full forward on my stick and then pull them backwards manually. It just will help with starting the aeroplane. One of Microsoft Flight Simulator's little nuances. Friction handle, so throttle friction is down here, and it's fine. It doesn't work, I don't think, in this model. Don't need it anyway. Alternate air controls, so 2 alternate airs here. Little note about the engines. Fuel injected, 6-cylinder Continental TSIO 360, I think. 220 horsepower per side. Loads of power, loads of torque. Great performance at high altitudes. All the way up to, I believe, 22,000 feet. Might be 24,000 feet. Don't quote me on that. I'll flash it up on screen, whatever the right answer is. So yeah, great performance from this aeroplane. So we should be expecting some pretty Starship climb performance, and we'll get into that in a second. Cowl flaps. So we'll set the cowl flaps open. So we've got our cowl flaps here, and we can see outside the aeroplane the cowl flaps are positioned here. These big chutes just in the underside of the cowling. And if you're unfamiliar with what those are, they basically open up the cowling and improve the cooling of the engines. Air-cooled engines we've got here, as are most piston engine light aircraft. And at the expense of some drag from having those things open, we can improve the cooling. So we always have those open for stars. Stabilator and rudder trim. So stabilator, similar to an Arrow, we've got an all-moving tailplane here called a stabilator with an anti-balance tab, which doubles up as our trim tab. So we make sure our trim is neutral there, and the rudder trim is neutral there, obviously very important if you have an engine failure. Fuel selectors, we're going to select those to on. Strange fuel selectors in Piper aeroplanes. They've got on, off, and crossfeed. So if you want to crossfeed either of these tanks, you have to take them through the off position. So I suspect what you have to do is just kind of whack them back as quickly as you can without turning the engine off, but a little strange. It's a bit like playing chicken with the fuel flow. Heater switch off. Now, unfortunately, this aircraft in real life has a fuel burning heater, a bit like the Seminole does, positioned in the nose of the airplane. It's all sort of automatically controlled. It'll shut itself down if it starts to overheat. Defroster and the fan and all this kind of stuff is here. Very cool little device, but unfortunately doesn't work at the moment in this add-on aeroplane, so it would be nice to see that become operational at some point. Radio master switch, so our avionics master is here and it's in the off position. Electrical switches are all off, and we'll check overhead here. So this is a Seneca 5 specifics feature. You always know you've arrived in the world of big aeroplanes when you got some switches over the top of your head. So we'll make sure that everything is off there, the landing lights, and keep that in the off position there as well. So these two are kind of two directional rocker switches, so the middle position is the off and the down position is off, these two. So yeah, all the electrical switches are off. Circuit breakers, we can check that they're, in fact, it's quite hard to hide this yoke because you have to click on the actual column that sticks out of the panel. These don't sort of flick out, you can't flick them out like you can on the Arrow, Just Flight Arrow. I always seem to mention that aeroplane every single time, don't I? But it's kind of what you expect from Carenado. It's functional, but not mega in-depth. Okay, so there's a few warning messages here about cold starting, making sure the engine is warmed and pre-turned if it's a very cold day, but we'll go for the normal start procedure. Propeller controls we've already checked full forward. Battery master switch, I'm going to do this on my honeycomb, so battery master switch is on. Gear lights, so now as you can see they have sort of brightened up now. If I sort of zoom in on them and just do you can see they definitely do get brighter when you turn the actual battery on. Fin strobe light on, so we'll turn the beacon on for start. We'll also get the navs going as well. Throttle 1/4 inch, so we'll just crack that open slightly. Fuel pump, now that noise is very loud and very annoying, and unfortunately it's going to have to be on for the whole of the starter procedure and the takeoff, so bear with me. Magneto switches, so we make sure they are in the on position. I'll do those with the honeycomb yoke switch, and the mags are up there. Unfortunately I've not got a separate one for each side, so both mags are on simultaneously when I move that switch. Now this is the priming process, so we're going to do left engine first. Get rid of the yoke so we can see a little bit better. Our fuel flow is there, this gauge here for the left engine. Throttle's there, so we're going to push forward the mixture, give it a little bit of throttle, and as you can see fuel is flowing. We'll give it about 4 seconds of that, pull it back, and then go back to about a 1/2 inch open on the throttle. We make sure the propeller area is all clear. We're not going to mince any virtual ground crew up, and then we're going to engage the starter, which is up here. So normally in the real aircraft you hit the starter, the engine will fire just based on the small amount of fuel that you've sort of primed it with, that it pulls through during the priming process, and then you throw the fuel flow forward like any fuel injected aircraft. Microsoft Flight Simulator won't allow that at the moment, so what you have to do is, as I'm going to do here, hit the starter, crank the engine, and then just throw the fuel flow in before it actually starts. So starter has clicked off, RPM between 1000 and 1200. And oil pressure is in the green here. Starter warning light is out, and that's a good start. So now we're going to I'll pop the world's noisiest fuel pump off as well, and then we're going to repeat the process with the other side. So we'll give it a little bit of throttle if I can without moving the other one, and check our fuel flow, shift it forward about 4 seconds of fuel, back off again, check the area is clear again, and then hit the starter, and then just throw the fuel in. And the starter's clicked off, starter warning light is out. RPM between 1000 and 1200. Oil pressure is in the green, and fuel pump, for the sake of our ears, not that one, can go off. Okay, so now it says to check the ammeter and voltmeter. Now, as far as I can tell, the ammeter and voltmeter is only available on this instrument here, which doesn't come on until you turn the avionics on, so we can't quite check those yet. Gyro vacuum we can check, that's down here, it's in the green operating range, so we're happy with that. Now there's loads of different engine starting processes, procedures to know if the engine's hot or not. So I'll just skip through those very quickly. So, let's do our before taxi checklist. So now the battery master switch is on and the radio master switch can come on. So let's put the avionics on like that with the honeycomb switch again. As you can see, all of our GPSs are now fired up, and our little digital readout is reading as well. So it's telling us that we've got a little slightly high RPM on the left side, so I'm just going to adjust that with my throttle. Very, very useful. These analog gauges look very cool, but they can be quite hard to read. And this thing just allows you to, at a glance, read them off very quickly. So very, very handy. Very nice to see. Okay, gyros. Well, one second actually, because all of our radios don't go on with the avionics master. I'm just going to put our transponder onto standby. I'm also going to put the weather radar onto standby as well. Not that we'll need it, because obviously there's no weather, but we'll certainly test that and then standby it. Right, so gyroscopic instruments. So we have a HSI, a slaved HSI on this side, which is reading about 345 and about 345 on there as well. So we're good on that. The co-pilot has just got a standard DI, so that is just a regular gyro instrument. Although I do believe it is possibly slaved to this side, because there isn't a way you can align this. So it's probably slaved as well, and that is reading correctly on there. Altimeter's checked and set, so the altimeter is just going to be 1013, which we have set, and it's reading airfield elevation plus or minus 50 feet, which is 50 feet here at Doncaster, getting about 30 feet there, so that's more than good enough. We've got two altimeters, one on each side, they're both reading correctly. Nav lights are already on, heater and defroster we can't use anyway, but it's a lovely warm day, so that's fine. Fuel selectors, check the crossfeed, so now I'm going to have to play chicken with the fuel flow to check that the crossfeed is working. So position my mouse very carefully. There we go. And this side. It's a bit awkward. You can hear the engine trying to run down there as it loses fuel flow. So not the most enjoyable experience in the world. It says here to just test it for 15 seconds. What I usually do is leave the crossfeeds on while we taxi, just to make doubly sure that they are okay. GNS 513, 430 powered and acknowledged. Yeah, we're all powered up. Let's just quickly set our radios and double check our flight instruments. We're going to go 11095 as usual for the ILS, and I'll just set Gamston VOR in the standby. And Nav2 can have the same treatments. And then we can quickly check our flight instruments, make sure they're all okay. So we've got airspeed reading 0, and our subscale is full and free. The little orange bars are lined up, and that's erect and correct. Altimeter set, reading within 50 feet airfield elevation. Wings level, balls in the middle, that's already checked against the compass. We're going to use runway 20 for departure, so I'm going to swing the heading indicator if I can. Move my view all over the place. To runway heading, which is 199, and same deal with the CDI. Like that. That's all checked, set, and aligned, and vertical speed reading 0. And we're happy with all the engine instruments. Nav radios, we can get an ident off here, so click in for the idents and turn it up. If we can, maybe. Is it going to do one? Maybe not. So maybe can't do the... Although it isn't actually identing on here yet either, so it might be just for that funny little bug that it won't actually pick up an ident until you're on the runway. I think that's something that's happening with all the aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator at the moment, so we'll ignore that for now, and we'll do it in a little bit, because I'm pretty sure that it does all work. Nav2 is set up, and again, not receiving a signal just yet, but hopefully we'll pick that up soon. And the good old ADF, let's put the Doncaster Foxtrot November Yankee on here, 3 right. Then hit the frequency button to swap those over. And that is actually giving us an indication, so maybe we'll be able to get an ident off that. Let's see. There we go. There we go. So all instruments and nav radios checked and set. I do the comm radios as well at this point in real life, but we've got no ATC to talk to. We're not on VATSIM or anything, so and I hate the text-to-speech ATC with a passion, so we're not going to be talking to them today. Autopilot test, so we're just going to pop the autopilot master on, which brings up the flight director there, and we're just going to check heading and alt. In real life, I would activate the autopilot and check that it can be overpowered and all sorts of other stuff, but I'm not going to bore you all with that today. We'll pop that back off again, and we're happy that it had a ready indication there, and it's ready to take over should it need to. Passenger briefing, well, we don't have any passengers, but, well, apart from you guys, but I'm sure you're familiar with all the safety features of this aircraft. Transponder to standby, which it is. We've got 7,000 set. Parking brake release, and we're ready to go. So, now, I'm just going to idle the power, release the parking brake, and as you can see, I'm not adding any throttle right now. We've actually started rolling forward. I would suspect, with an aircraft which is pretty much 2 tons in weight, even though it's got 2 very large 3-bladed propellers spinning around there would not be enough air moving around outside to roll the aircraft forward from idle power. So it gets moving a little bit too easily. I'm not having to add any power whatsoever, it's just kind of rolling forward just on the tick over. So a stark contrast from the Microsoft Flight Simulator defaults, which all feel like they're stuck in the mud. But maybe a little bit too far the other way. Fantastic noise, which I do believe is a proper custom sound. Really hear those 6 cylinders spluttering away like some kind of old American dragster. Unfortunately, the sound inside is nowhere near as good. It's very muffled and quiet. In fact, the fuel pumps are way louder than the engines, which is odd, really. It's not what you'd expect. Which is why, on the ground, I like to open the storm window and fill my ears with the sounds of American dragsters. But for the sake of your ears, I'll keep it closed. And we'll keep things nice and quiet and civilized inside. It almost seems like the headphone effects, noise-cancelling effects, option has been selected from the audio options in Microsoft Flight Simulator, but I assure you it hasn't. I've double-checked that it hasn't been turned on by accident. I do use that when I'm using the Flying Iron Spitfire because it is so unbelievably loud inside. Brilliant noise, but very, very loud indeed. One thing that I have noted is quite loud, though, is all of these little shuffling noises when you spin the aeroplane round. These sort of immersive ambient things, which I think are just a bit too loud, really, in comparison to the very muffled engine sounds. So we'll spin around, set the parking brake, RPM back to just over 1,000, and then we shall do our power checks. Okay, so power checklist, sorry, should I say. Parking brake is set. Taxi light, well, we didn't use the taxi light. Slap myself on the wrist there. Mixture's full rich, red levers are all the way forward. Prop control, so we got full forward max RPM on the props. Throttle's 1,000 RPM, which we have close enough. Engine instruments check. Our T's and P's are in the green. We're looking specifically for oil temperature and making sure that they have warmed up properly before we start revving the engines up. First of all, we're going to go to 1,500 RPM, so I'm going to add power. So we have 1,500, back it off slightly. I've noticed that the engine handling of this aeroplane is quite nice, actually. The throttle response is pretty much instant. It doesn't have that strange sort of lag that some aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator have. And now we're going to check the feathering function. So we're going to do this, and we're going to allow the RPM to drop a maximum of 300. So we're going to do left engine first. That is definitely working. And right engine, that's definitely working as well. Now we're we're going to go up to 1700 RPM, and we're going to exercise the props. Now, it recommends for the first flight of the day to do this 3 times, so we'll do our usual 3 times check of the props. First time, we'll check for a rise in manifold air pressure, so it's probably better to look for it on here, and a drop in RPM. Second time, we're going to look for any oil over the cowling, and the third time, we're going to look for a fluctuation in oil pressure. So we shall get the yoke away so we can have a look at that. So first time, looking at the map and the RPM. RPM decrease, manifold pressure increase, good. Second time, obviously I'd have my head out the left-hand side of the aircraft doing that, but no oil over the cowling. And we'll zoom in, looking for the oil pressure now. And we saw a drop in oil pressure there, so indication that the oil is moving from the sump into the accumulator and the governor unit for the constant speed propeller. And same deal on the other side, so drop in RPM, increase in manifolds, let it recover. No oil over the top, let it recover. And oil pressure drop and recover. Back again. I'm going to take the front cross feed off at this point. We know that they are definitely working now. Alternate air check on. No drop in map or RPM. And check the mags. So we're going to look for a mag drop of no more than 300. I've got to do them both at the same time, so let's look at them both at the same time. About 80 RPM, 90 RPM, that's good. Back to both. Covers. And the right side. Same story on the right side, about 90 RPM. Back to both, well within limits. Voltmeter, we're going to check our volts. So we go to the electrics there. And battery is fully charged, 24 volts and 50.8 amps. Alternator output, so we check that, yeah, that we've got both left side and right side. We can check, so we can pop these off. Actually, I can't because it's on my honeycomb. Great, let's see if I can do this. Turn it off, do them both at the same time. So now you can see amps have now dropped off to 0, and the battery is starting to discharge. Put it back on, and the battery will charge up again, and as you can see, amps are reading both sides. Lovely. Annunciator panel lights out, apart from pitot heat. That's good. Gyro vacuum gauge, and again, we're in normal range, and we shall pull the throttle all the way back and check the idle. Bring that back up, go back to 1000 RPM. Now it says ice protection equipment check is required, so if we intended to use the ice protection gear, we would use it. We would turn it on at this point and check visually that the boots inflate and deflate. Now, as far as I can tell, they've not measured that feature, or modelled that feature, sorry, in this particular model. It would be very cool to see, but you can't quite do that, so we'll not bother doing that. We can check the prop heats, see the amps going up on the little gauge here, which indicates they are working, and we can check on the page here if we put the windshield heat on. Technically, that should increase the draw, but it isn't. Well, I would expect that to increase the draw on the amps, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be doing that. But essentially what the windshield heat is this little panel here, which is a little piece of heated glass. The rest of the cockpit window is plastic, I believe, but just this one little square is heated glass. So if you do have an incident where your windscreen all ices over, then you can turn this on and de-ice just a little square, just enough for you to see through. Normally, obviously, you'd have the windscreen defrost on to try and prevent that from happening if you were flying in IMC. But anyway, getting off the beaten track as usual. So let's do our before takeoff checklist. Doors are latched, seat backs are erect, seats adjusted, locked and in position. Seatbelts and harnesses are fastened to adjusted, armrests are stowed, battery master switches on, alternators are both on. Standby fuel pumps, so mind your ears because the world's noisiest fuel pumps are coming on. Flight instruments checked and set for departure. Yeah, we've got the runway heading is set on there, altimeters are set, times to QNH, reading correctly. And synced up. Engine instruments are in the green. Prop heaters required, we don't need it. Windshield heaters required, again, don't need it. Pitot heater will just save until our lineup. Prop controls, got blue levers full forward, mixtures are full forward as well. Alternate airs are closed. Flaps set, which is up for departure. You can use 25 degrees, which is the second, yes, the second setting, for a short fuel departure in this airplane if you need to. But plenty of runway here at Doncaster, so we don't need that. Air conditioner is off. Stabilizer and rudder trims are both set and checked, as we have checked before. Yaw damper off or auto, so this aircraft does have a yaw damper in real life, which is controlled by this little switch here. Unfortunately, as far as I can tell, it doesn't work in this model, which is a little bit disappointing. It would be nice to see. It's quite an unusual feature in a piston-engined aircraft to see a yaw damper. Small piston-engine aircraft, anyway. Fuel selectors are on, which they are. Flight controls checked, so mind your knees, left hand down, left side up. Right hand down, right side up, and the opposite for the other side. Can't see the stabilizer, well, a tiny bit, you can, from back here, but we will check. We've got full travel on there, and the rudder we have checked as part of our taxi checks. Parking brake release, and yeah, we're ready to go. So let's idle throttle. Release the parking brake. Now, this aircraft rotates at 79 knots, or 80 knots for cash. Climbs VY 88 knots, and then cruise climb at 110. So I'm going to climb at initially 88 knots. Now I'll put the graph on the screen for you now. We should be seeing approximately 1,700 feet per minute for the climb performance. Full power, gear up, props and throttles all the way forward, full mixture at this weight. Now bear in mind the book figures are always conservative, so don't expect them to be 100% on the money. I'm going to do our lineup now. So ATPL, approach path is checked, transponder is on, pitot heat on, and the lights. So let's put our pulse on the lights to scare any birds away. Put the taxis on as well, and we'll go to strobe on those lights there. So we're all set and ready to go. T's and P's are in the green. Let's do a rolling departure. So I'll restrict add a little bit of braking. Start to add a bit of power. T's and P's are good. No warning lights. Power's set. Engines sound much better at high power setting. You see the speeds picking up very, very quickly, as you'd expect. Looking for 79. There we go. Nice and heavy on the controls. Nice gentle rotate there. Keep the ball in the middle as we climb, and immediately start to pitch the aircraft up to keep it at 88 or 90. So it makes no difference. Knots. Positive climb gear up. Gear in transit lights are on. We'll let that rate of climb settle down a bit as the airspeed settles. And I'm having to add quite a lot of nose up trim as well. It's a little bit all over the place because I'm flying quite poorly at the moment. So it's giving us about, it's kind of waving all over the place, but it's giving us about what we'd expect. There's 16, there's 17, there's 18, there's 19, 1900 feet per minute, which is good. That's on the money. I'll try and keep it climbing at VY full forward. Past 1,000 feet now after takeoff checks. So that's set climb power. That's going to be, let's get it on our digital on there to help me out. So it's going to be 32 inches manifold pressure, 2,500 RPM. The aircraft just drift steadily into a cruise climb. Lots and lots of climb performance in this aeroplane, and it seems to be doing pretty much what it should be in terms of the book figures if I fly it a little bit more accurately, that is. Another great thing that I've noticed with this aeroplane is that it does behave like a fuel-injected aeroplane. You don't have to touch the red levers at all. As per the POH, you just leave the red levers full forward for the duration of the climb. So even if you're going all the way up to 22,000 feet, you don't have to touch the fuel flows at all, which is great. It's actually correctly modelling a fuel-injected aeroplane there, which is really nice to see. Up to the immersion. The handling of the aeroplane, as you probably saw on the rotation, really heavy, which is perfect. That's just what my boss told me the Seneca is like. It's a heavy, industrial, agricultural feeling aeroplane. Takes a lot of effort on the controls, quite a lot of effort on the trim, and I'm trimming as we speak now to try and maintain that 110 knots. And she's going up nicely, achieving about sort of 1,400 feet per minute, even in a cruise climb, which is indicative of how this aeroplane should be performing. So we'll take her up to 4,000 feet, we'll level off that, and then we'll check out the cruise performance. Okay, so coming up to 4,000 now, I'm going to let the nose start to drop. Lovely stable aeroplane, as you'd expect from a slab wing Piper. But as I said, very heavy, so lots of trim required if you're going to fly this aeroplane comfortably. And you can see the speed shooting up now. I'm going to bring the power back to 30 inches and keep the prop at 2,500 RPM, which is the cruise power setting of this aeroplane, and we'll see what sort of speed we settle at, and then we'll compare that to the POH book figures. So finish our after takeoff checks now. So fuel pumps can both go off, flaps are up, landing lights can go off, attitude and trims are set, and the pumps are off. And we can also bring our fuel flows back. We're going to aim for peak turbine inlet temperature, so long as it doesn't go past the red line there, so about there should do. As you can see, the speed is just sort of creeping up. It takes a while, but we are accelerating. I'm having to constantly sort of adjust that trim down as we speed up as well, and it's taking up a typical sort of Piper aircraft nose attitude, quite nose low, as Pipers almost always are. Properly. So we're getting about 160 indicated, 155, and 162 on the ground speed. Okay, so I've had another quick look at the book. Now we should be getting about 168 knots at this altitude and this power setting. That's true, not indicated. So let's do our little adjustment. So we've got 7 degrees outside air temperature. We're at 4,000 feet. So let's adjust that. Onto that. And as you can see, about 165. So within a couple of knots of the book figures, we'll take that. That's pretty good. Now let's check out some other speed settings. Now, the long-range cruise configuration of this aeroplane, which gives you just over 6 hours of fuel endurance, is 25 inches of manifold pressure and 2,200 RPM. So we're going to reduce the power setting. I'm drifting off all over the place. So I'm just going to sort of take us around a little bit, because this speed will be down in Nottingham before we can blink an eye. I'm going to back us off to 25 inches. I'm going to go back to the gauge up there, and then pull all the way back to 2,200 RPM. Right, Right, so this should be giving us around about 135 true. So that's 130 indicators. And you can see pretty close to the money there. Yeah, about 135 true. So good job on the cruise speeds really as a whole. We should also be getting about 18 gallons an hour. So we'll check if we can here. Oh, it doesn't give you a gallons per hour. That's moderately annoying. But we can check the fuel flow. Got about 20 gallons an hour, so it's within a couple of gallons. Maybe if I adjusted things a little bit more sparingly, I could probably bring the fuel flows back a little bit more. There we go. That's around about 22 gallons an hour now. So fuel consumption is about right, and cruise performance is about right. So let's mess things up a little bit and start doing some general handling, shall we? So, aircraft is trimmed down. Aircraft is also above normal operating speed for this weight, so we can use full deflection if we need to. I'm going to put the fuel flows full forwards. I'm also going to put the world's loudest fuel pumps back on. Obviously, we do our HASTE check now, so that's height, airframe, safety and security, engine, T's and P's in the green, lookout and location. I'm not going to do the full lookout term because that's just going to take ages and we don't have any traffic in the sim anyway, but we'll go straight into our first manoeuvre, which as always is a clean stall. So I'm going to bring the power all the way back, and that's the gear warning horn there going mad. Push the props all the way forward. I'm just going to pitch to maintain with a bit of trim to help. Very heavy aeroplane, like I said, so trim is quite important to be able to pull one of these manoeuvres on without losing too much height. But be careful not to add too much trim below about 70 knots. And we're wobbling, and she's still a little bit of a wing drop. Now let the nose go, full power set, and then reset the climb. We'll go back up to 4,000. So perhaps a little bit more snappy than you'd expect from one of these aircraft. It really should just mush around at the stall with very little wing dropping or anything like that, unless you're being very aggressive. But I must say, compared to some of Carenado's other aeroplanes, which try to flip upside down and spin you into the floor, that's actually a huge improvement. So good. It's not perfect, but it's about there. Just for the avoidance of doubt, I'm going to do a approach configuration stall. So let's bring that power back and get the speed down a touch, and then we'll set up for this stall. So height is sufficient to be recovered before 3,000 feet. Let's get the speed below 128. Gear down. Speed below 140. Flaps 1. That power back. Unlike some of the other Carenado aircraft, which don't seem to have enough drag on the flight model, this one definitely does, and it slows down quite rapidly once you get it below a certain speed, certainly in landing configuration. Below 113 knots now, so we can add flaps 2 and flaps 3, which is flaps 40. Using the correct terms. As you can see, the aircraft settle at about 90 knots. Let's go straight into the manoeuvre. So again, I'm going to set the throttles to idle. I'm going to pitch to maintain altitude. We're going to see what sort of handling the aircraft exhibits in the stall. There's the stall warner, heavy buffets. And that's very nice, actually. That's very benign. So we'll recover from there. Just a nice nodding down of the nose and the aircraft mushing around a bit. Maybe wouldn't be quite that extreme on the nose drop, but positive climb, flap, positive climb, gear up, positive climb, flaps 2, and still positive flaps up, and we'll recover. So yeah, climb performance not perfect, but certainly a big improvement from some of the other Carenado aircraft. Certainly the Cessna and the Seminole that I tested tried to face plant me into the floor, whereas this aeroplane has not done that, so big thumbs up. so I've set our long-range cruise config back up again. I've just about got the aeroplane trimmed down again. So we're going to do a steep turn. So the handling characteristics I'm looking for in a steep turn, I expect the aircraft is going to be heavy in pitch, but very nice and stable. So once I've got it set up and I've got the right amount of pull, the aircraft should just kind of sit there and perform quite nicely for me. So we'll have a quick look out in the direction of tail. We're going to go to the left. And bank, balance, back pressure. I'm just going to go for 45 degrees angle of bank, as I usually do. I add a little bit of power. And I am, yeah, definitely having to pull quite a lot. Maybe a little bit too much there. But the bank angle is nice and stable. And once I've got my amount of back pressure, which is quite a lot, which is exactly what you'd expect, set, the aircraft does sit there very nicely. I'm going to come out of this, anticipate by about 10 degrees, kick out of it, and then remember to relax that back pressure as the aircraft comes out of the turn, otherwise you're going to go shooting up. I'm also going to reset the power back at 25 inches manifold pressure. So yeah, very nice steep turn there. Okay, that's enough trying to make us throw up for now. Let's pop off the fuel pumps and get our fuel flow set again. And let's have a look at some automated flights, shall we? So I suspect the majority of you who will be buying this aeroplane will be flying around IFR, and using quite a lot of the Autopilot, so this is probably quite important that this works well. So let's pop the flight directors on, and let's go heading at Alt, and then let's go Auto. Bit of a jerk, and it seems to be, I don't know what altitude it's got selected here. Seemingly 3,800, okay. Fair enough. Close enough. Let's stick it back in VS and go back up to 4,000. Bit of power. So, Autopilot's pretty functional. Does the job. Certainly got a lot more function than the Arrow Autopilot. Although I can't seem to find out how to get it to alt capture. Perhaps I need to read the enclosed Autopilot document a little bit more closely. There we go, that'll do. Back into alt hold mode now. So, let's stick a route in, shall we? So, usual story. I'm just going to put a DTO in to E. Enter into GPS mode and get the airplane turning the right way, and then we'll put her in nav mode. It's got 21 miles to go, so plenty of time to check the performance of the Autopilot. While we're up here, I'll put the weather radar on just so you can see that it does actually work, but obviously it's not going to paint anything because there is nothing out there. So we'll leave it on standby and save our microwaves. And pop her into nav mode. So 246. Should have done this first. But as I always say, I am a terrible pilot. Please excuse. Anyway, that's given us a decent opportunity to watch it pick up the route we've got set here. So let's see. Let's watch it do that. Very nice and smooth and competent. am very impressed with the handling of this aeroplane. It does really feel like how I imagine a Seneca does in real life. My limited experience with heavy industrial piston twins certainly doesn't apply to what this aeroplane feels like in the sim. That said, I've got a honeycomb yoke set up, so might be flattering it a little bit, but it certainly does feel very nice to me. When we were in the hangar, or having a look at the outside of the aeroplane, is that these little static wings are animated. Look at that, look. They're actually flapping away in the airflow. That is really, really good. That is exactly what those things do in real life. They just kind of flap around jerkily like that. What they are there for is to disperse static electricity from the airframe. So if you're starting to fly through something with an atmosphere which is kind of ionized, I believe. I'm not a physicist, but I think that's the right term. And static charge starts to build up on the aircraft skin. What these help to do is dissipate it back into the atmosphere. And there we go. We have picked up our route, 15 miles to run. So let's plan our descent quickly so we don't embarrass ourselves when we arrive at Nottingham. So 4,000 feet, and we're going to be down to thousands. That's 3,000 feet to lose, which is 9 miles. So we'll start our drop at about 10 or 11, give ourselves a couple of miles to level off outside of the ATZ, as we're coming into the ATZ. Now I'm going to pop the power back up again and go back into a fast cruise. So let's go 2,500 RPM. So reds, blues, blacks. When you're going up on the power, right to left across the quadrant, and I'm going to pop the power up to 30 inches and then bring the fuel flows back again to peak turbine inlet temperature. So long as it doesn't surpass the red line, you've always got to be careful not to go past there. Got a bit of parallax error there. I think those red lights will pop on if we go too far, so bring it back to about there. Old throttle isn't doing me any favours here. You can see how it's wobbling up and down. It's certainly seen better days. I really fancy one of those honeycomb Bravo quadrants, but they're so hard to get hold of. Almost as hard as 30 series graphics cards. So completely forgotten about our descents, so let's get it underway now. Gonna have to go pretty fast. I'll shut the horn off, let's put it in VS mode, come down fairly rapidly. Let's go for 1,500 feet a minute, and it's handling that quite nicely. Props forward to act like a bit of an air brake for us there. Leaving the cowl flaps closed in the descent. Because obviously overcooling the engines and the turbos is probably your biggest concern in the descent. Do our pre-joining checks, so fuel is on and sufficient. Just do a quick check, yeah. Pumps, let's put our loud old pumps on. Radio is set, mixture's full rich, altimeter set air fuel to QNH, and DI is behaving itself. You can see it's still nicely lined up there. You can start to see the water sports centre over here. So we're going to do our usual and join dead side. So we're going to back off the into heading mode and just come right slightly. I'm going to start backing those props off now, because as I always am at pains to explain, the faster the prop is turning, the more noise it's making, so as we start to descend, we need to make sure that our RPM is as low as possible. Now, getting towards the ATZ of an uncontrolled airfield, we always try to be reasonably slow. We don't want to be bucketing it at 160 odd knots, because that would probably surprise a fair few people. Certainly microlight or helicopters that might be knocking around there. Now, we could choose to whack the lights on at this point if it was particularly busy, but I'll defer that given that we're in a nice empty simulator today. Certainly in real life I'd be listening out on the radio. I've already made a radio call to the tower. I'm going to pop the autopilot off now, by the way. I'd have certainly made a call to the tower explaining what kind of join I was going to be doing, so we're going to be joining dead side for runway 27 here. And I'd be saying on the radio, Golf Foxtrot Hotel Oscar, descending dead side runway 27. And trying to keep that speed under control. Excuse the loud bleeping. As you can see there, here, with the throttles back, the aircraft is going down quite nicely and slowing down as well if I idle all the way. See that big draggy airframe slowing us down quite nicely. So circuit's height at Nottingham is 800 feet above ground level. Airfield elevation is 150 feet, so we're going to go for 950. I'm going to pop the flight directors off now to get rid of erroneous signals from that thing. There's our 950. We're going to aim for in the region of 100 to 110 knots for our speed in the circuit, so I'm going to set the power as required to achieve that. As you can see, the aircraft is barely ticking over. So, circuit detail as usual. For a twin-engined aircraft, we will do a standard approach, full flap, a flapless approach, and then we will fail an engine and try to make a circuit on one engine. Something you'll notice very quickly about flying the Seneca is the engine is really in the way. It's crosswind. We're doing a terrible job of maintaining altitude here. It's just because I forgot to set my CDI on runway heading. It's part of the join, which I'd usually be doing. Speed's decayed a little bit as well, which is making this a touch tricky, so let's try and get on top of that. See, a little touch of power very quickly gets us back up to speed and altitude. So, brakes are checked to pressurise undercarriage, speed below 128, gear down. Mixture is full rich, flaps. Speed check below 140, flaps 1. Instruments are all in the green. Carpet we don't have, we've got those. Cycle them, hatches and harnesses secure. Cowl flaps can come open. And lights can come on. Now, I always try to avoid putting flaps out in a turn, especially when the aircraft is equipped with electric flaps like this one. So I'm going to try to avoid putting the flap down as we're coming around onto base leg here. As we're coming out of the corner, we'll go speed below 120, flaps 2. Try to line up with final approach as best as I can. It's very difficult when this huge engine is in the way. So we'll try and cheat a little bit by looking at the GPS, zoom that in a touch. Normally I'd put this in OBS mode and just put a big magenta line down the middle. We're way high here, so let's put that stage of flaps out and let's use the brick-like tendencies of the Seneca to help us out here. Reds are full forward, blues can go full forward, and we do have 3 greens somewhere underneath that yoke. a touch fast, touch high, but we can get that under control quite easily. 90 knots is our target approach speed. Lots of effort on the yoke required. Let's get the nose up, in the flare, off the power now. Just let her settle down nice and gently. There we go, close enough. Flaps are travelling. Full power sets. And there's 79, and off we go again. As you can see, virtually no rudder required during the climb out and positive climb gear up is because this aircraft has counter-rotating propellers, just like the Seminole, so both of them turn inwards towards the fuselage, which means there is no critical engine, and each of them cancel out the propeller slipstream effect of the other one, which is very handy, certainly when you've got a big heavy aeroplane with all this power on tap. And speaking of big heavy airplanes with lots of power, get that power back, get those props back before we bust through our desired altitudes. And round we go again for a flapless circuit. Now, flapless approaches in an aircraft like this should be reasonably easy just because you have so much drag available. It's not hugely difficult to get the airplane slowed down and at the right altitude. Now, we turned a little late and we were a bit high last time, so let's try and get down to at least sort of 700 feet for the start of this turn. That looks a lot better. And let's do our reds, blues, greens again. So reds fall forward, blues fall forward, 3 greens, somewhere underneath the yoke. Pull that power back and just use the natural drag of the aircraft. Plenty of trim to help. Use the pedals to get her on the centre line. Aiming for about 95 on the approach and 90 over the numbers. Touch on the floaty side. Oh, well off the centre line that time. Should probably have put my seat up a little bit so I could see better. And power sets. And 79 rotates. Positive climb flaps. I'll get us on the crosswind leg and then I'll pull one of the engines. Doesn't matter which one, so I'll just do the left. And we'll see what the single engine climb performance is like. Now, the advice in the book says to bank the aircraft up to 5 degrees towards the live engine, so that's going to be to the right in this case, to achieve a climb performance. And I'll put the graph on the screen now, but it should be around about 400 feet per minute. So here we go. I said I was going to go for the left one, didn't I? I went for the right one. There we go. There's the left engine failed. Let's add that bank angle in and pitch for VYSE, which is 88 knots. There we go. And identify the dead engine. Yeah, left engine. Shut it up. Feather the prop. As you can see, the prop is nice and feathered. Let's get some rudder trim in. Now, the book recommends to fly the aircraft slightly out of rudder trim with the bank angle in there. And as you can see, the stall warner's going off there because I'm trying to get the aircraft to climb and it's just decaying speed constantly. So at this weight, I'll even get the dead engine's cowl flaps up and the live one at half, as you are supposed to do as per the book. Full power set, prop full forward on this side. And we're at VYSC, we're actually got a descent of about 250 feet per minute. So, a little worrying. So, yeah, I mean, obviously in a turn it's making the situation even worse. I could try and bring the aeroplane round and land on 03 if we were a little closer to the field, but I don't think we are close enough. So, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to restart the dead engine. windmill start it. There we go. And open the cowl flaps back up again. So, unfortunately, single engine climb performance is nowhere near as good as it should be. Now, I've tried that with both engines, various different weights and configs, and I could not get it to climb at all. It was always a descent. Just trying to get the rudder trim sorted out before things get too crazy. So yeah, so the single engine climb performance is definitely not what it should be. Hopefully that might be something they can fix, and we'll see. So we'll just do a standard approach for the final try. It's going to be quite a long final this time, because we've come all the way past the A46. Now this road here. So we're just outside the ATZ now. Let's get the descent on the go. And brakes, undercarriage, low 128, just get down. Mixtures full rich, fuel on and sufficient. Flaps, speed check below 140, flaps 1. Instruments are all good, car keys don't have. Just got these, so let's cycle them. Action harnesses are secure and the lights are on. Turn up a touch, see how much you have to pull to compensate when you're in a 30-degree angle of bank turn. Quite a heavy aeroplane, stubby wings, that's exactly what you'd expect. So, established speed check below 120 flaps 2 and below 113 flaps 3. Is giving us white and a red, so that's okay for now. I'm going to hoik my seat up slightly so I don't have the same issue I had last time and lose sight of the runway. Obviously flapless approach, though the touchdown angle is much higher, you'll find, than with flap, so it's quite normal. Okay, reds, blues, greens. Reds forward, blues forward, and yeah, 3 greens. Back to 90 knots on the Vasi. Let's aim for those numbers and trying to make that centre line as well. Start to back the power off, bring that nose up. That's more like it. And braking, we'll try and make this turn off. Lovely. That was a bit more like it. Okay, so here we are back on the ground at Nottingham, and I think it's about time for a conclusion about this aeroplane. So usually, as usual, I have my list of notes that I've made, positives and negatives. I'm just going to talk through them, and then I'll try to come to some sort of conclusion at the end of it as to whether I think this is worth the money. So, positives first of all. Let's be positive. The external and the internal model and little animations are really, really good. I mean, you pretty much expect that at this point from Carenado. The quality of the textures are absolutely excellent. Just looking at the nice seats here, you can literally just feel like you can reach out and touch that stuff. And going outside, I was really surprised by the little animations on the static wicks. Very pleasantly surprised, shall we say. It was really nice to see, very sort of immersive to see those sort of wiggling around really like they do in flight and for real. So yeah, it's good. Liveries are fantastic. I really like this one, obviously, but there are plenty of other really good ones. There's that white one if you don't like coloured liveries, I don't know. But there's lots of variety. They're all based on real aeroplanes. Yeah, they all look great. Coming back inside, the analog setup is going to be a real positive for a lot of you. Just to have something that's not a G1000 setup is still fairly rare in this simulator. So the fact that they've gone to the trouble of making all of this analog when they were perfectly within their rights to just whack a G1000 in it, because I do believe that is an option on this aircraft from new, is really appreciated. I think a lot of people will appreciate that. A lot of these are custom instruments. I have, like I said earlier, I have seen some of these on other Carenado products, but you know, just because it's there we go, sort that out. Just because it is not specific to this airplane doesn't mean it's not a good not a good thing. And like I said, you know, just because it's on the Seminole doesn't mean it's not it wouldn't be fitted to one of these as well. I mean, they're both Piper aircraft at the end of the day. Also, some of the avionics are custom as well. You've got a custom transponder, you've got a custom autopilot, comm panel, you've got the weather radar, although the weather radar's actual function is default. The little gauge that it sits in is in fact a fully custom instrument. All of these flight mode annunciator, I always forget the name, up here is custom. The little DME readout and this little digital MFD here is all custom made and really, really nice. It works great. It looks really good as well, and all these kind of gauges. Obviously, all the engine instrumentation is all custom as well. So yeah, hats off to them there. They've definitely not taken a shortcut on modelling the instrumentation inside the cockpit. Exterior sounds I've got down. I think the exterior sounds of this aeroplane are absolutely kick-ass, to be perfectly honest. Especially the idle. The idle sounds really, really meaty. Really like a I don't know, like you're at a drag strip and somebody's just pulled up in some V8 thing with straight through pipes. They sound great and really immersive as well. Like quite often with these sorts of big 6-cylinder aircraft, you do your power checks and then you chop the throttle a little bit too quickly, perhaps. And you get loads of pops and bangs and flames out of the exhaust, and it all looks really cool. Lots of black smoke and things like that. And you can almost sort of imagine it, feel it happening with this aeroplane, with the external sound set that it has, which is really, really nice. The documentation that Carenado supply with this aeroplane, it's their standard sort of packet of documents, I think, but they've gone to some effort to provide some really good documentation with the aircraft. All of it is copied from the Real Aircraft's Pilot's Operating Handbook, so if you are not of the kind of persuasion of going out and hunting down PDF copies of the Real Aircraft's POH and checklists and stuff, then the stuff that Carenado provide in the route directory of the aircraft is the same, basically. Plus you also have the little checklist on the pad as well, which is really handy, especially while you're still sort of getting used to flying the aeroplane. So really good there. What I've also got down here is the general handling of the aeroplane feels really realistic. It's exactly what I'd expect with this aeroplane. Unfortunately, I haven't flown the real one, so I don't have too much of a reference, but I have flown the Duchess, which is kind of similar. It's a big, fat, heavy, old-fashioned piston twin. It's got a lot less power than this. But I kind of imagined coming into this that it felt a lot like a Duchess. For everything I've heard my boss talk about this aeroplane, you know, big, heavy, very stable, very benign aeroplane. Jimbo's flown, I think it was a 3, Seneca 3, or maybe it was a 2. It's one of the early ones, certainly not as powerful as one of these. But he has flown one of the early ones, and he backs that up and says, you know, it's a big, heavy, stable aircraft. And that's certainly is what it feels like in the sim with my control settings. Like I said, I've got a honeycomb yoke with very slight reactivity curve, or whatever it's called. Sensitivity curve, there we go. In the settings, and with that setup, it really feels like a real aeroplane. And I mean, it's the same setup I use for the Arrow, and the Arrow does an equally good job, I would say, of feeling like the real thing. So big hats off to them, to Carenado for that, because certainly the Cessna 182 that I tested did not feel much like a real Cessna 182. This really does a great job in having that sort of that feel to it. And also when we were doing the steep turns, the amount of back pressure I was having to apply to the yoke to maintain altitude was exactly what I'd expect of an aircraft like this. You know, you've got to put some muscle effort into it to get it to do what you want it to do. Same thing on the landing, coming into the flare. You've really got to yank the yoke back, use the trim to help, and that's exactly what I'd expect from this kind of aeroplane. The next thing I've got down is a real tick from me. The performance of the aircraft is very close to the book figures. It's pretty much what you'd expect. It's within the same sort of window of variance as the Just Flight Arrow is from the documentation. Like I said earlier, the POH figures are always a little bit adjusted down from the best case scenario, just to compensate for an aeroplane that's a bit old and worn out. So if you've got a brand new shiny aeroplane, then it will quite happily outperform the book figures by a margin, by a couple of 100 feet per minute, 200-300 feet per minute is certainly within that window. And that's kind of what we were getting out of the aircraft. It was obviously kind of going up and down a little bit because I wasn't quite flying it as smoothly as I should have been, perhaps. Bonk on the head for me. But certainly once it had settled down, it was within that window and performing exactly as I would expect it to in the climb. In the cruise, it was within sort of between 5 and 8 knots, slightly on the slow side, but that possibly could be to do with the fact that we were full weight. I've flown this aeroplane with a more sort of moderate load, and it was easily sort of sitting up there at 170 odd knots, true. At higher altitude as well, I've been all the way up to 10, 11,000 feet with this aircraft. It performs exactly as it should do in terms of airspeed, so it sits at the right true airspeed. Also a big thing for me, the engines behave like turbocharged fuel-injected engines, so the manifold air pressure stays constant. The red levers can stay all the way forward, and you won't lose a bunch of power like you do in the default aircraft, even if they're supposed to be fuel injected. That's not what would happen in real life. The POH in a fuel injected aircraft will generally say, keep the red levers all the way at the stops until you finish your climb, then pull them back to refine your fuel flow to the book figures. And that's exactly what you can do in this aeroplane, which is a huge thumbs up from me. I think the engine handling in general is really well done in this aeroplane. The engine, the throttle response is very nice and responsive, which is what you'd expect, really. Obviously, it's turbocharged, so there's a little bit of lag effect coming in there, but not so much. It's not like driving a turbocharged car. It's a different sort of story with an aeroplane. So yeah, fantastic job with the handling of the aeroplane, the performance, and also the engine handling. And honestly, those were really the things that Carenado really fell down with all the other products of theirs that I've tested. And with this aeroplane, they're sticking it on the money pretty much, which is fantastic. You know, it's really good. So huge thumbs up from me for that. The final positive that I've got is that the Seneca 5 in general is just a really interesting aeroplane, and it fits into flight sim very well. So this might be a subjective thing. This might just be me speaking from my own experiences. But since I was given this aeroplane, I've been flying it around loads because it's just really fun, and you can do all sorts of stuff with it. It's great at high altitudes. It's great in high temperatures. It's fast. It's great at short field as well. It's something I obviously didn't show you. Yeah, and it can do pretty much anything you want a flight sim aeroplane to do. It can do that. It can fit into whatever role. It's diverse, shall we say? So I think that if you are a fan of GA aircraft, you will have a lot of fun flying this aeroplane around. and taking it to all your favourite airports, because it pretty much can make it into all your favourite airports, and it certainly won't take a particularly long time to get there either. So they're all the positives that I've come up with. Now let's have a good old whinge and think about the negatives. So first thing I've got here is there's a little bit of lack of functionality inside. It would have been really nice to have a working yaw damper. There's a yaw damper trimmer there. And all the switches are so nicely modelled, and it's like, oh no, we can't use them. So it would be really good. Also, the heater system doesn't work, and it would be nice to be able to use that. Strange, because the Seminole's heater does work. Things like, certain things, they're really nice that they've included. The prop sync has been included. Weather radar, like I was saying earlier, but it could have just really pushed it up to that sort of higher echelon of add-on aeroplane, if it just had a little bit more functionality, which I don't think would have taken that long to model, really. I mean, I don't know, I'm not a flight sim developer, but yeah, a yaw damper and a heater would have gone a long way to just upping that immersion factor. Now I've noticed there's a couple of little sort of lighting bugs. Now if I go outside, now the battery's off, everything's off inside. Pop outside, and then with my honeycomb yoke, I put the landing and taxi lights on. All of a sudden, I can turn those on. The other lights don't work, so that's the beacon not working, nav, strobes, all of those. But for some reason, the landing and taxi nose wheel lights here work regardless of whether the battery is on or not. So it's just a little bug, just a little niggle. Another thing, I'm just going to flash up a picture of what the panel looks like at night, so the nighttime lighting. It's all very nice and pretty, and the reflections are great. You can see the cabin reflections on the wing and all sorts of stuff, which is really cool. I certainly recommend flying this airplane at night. However, it is impossible to see the heading bug at night, which can be quite annoying. Obviously, you've got if you have tooltips enabled, you have the little thing pop up here that tells you what you've got your heading bug selected to. But if you don't fly with those, it's almost impossible to see the heading bug at night, which is annoying. They could do with just making it so it lights up and pops out a little bit more. These are sounding really whingy and gripey, but hey, I'm a pilot and that's what I do best. The boots, given that they went to the trouble of animating the static wigs, it would have been really good to see some animated boots on there. It would have really, really made this aeroplane stand out amongst all of the defaults. As it is, the animations are great, but it would have been really cool to see some de-icing boots, in my opinion. The stall characteristics. Now, I was saying that the handling of the airplane was really great. And this is, the next couple of things are all going to be about the handling. And by contrast, it kind of makes these worse by contrast, because the rest of it is so good. But the stall is still a little bit too aggressive. The real airplane is just like the Arrow. So the real airplane stalls and then just mushes around with the nose sat in the air. This aeroplane, it still kind of drops a wing a little bit. The approach configuration stall was a little bit more like it, although it did sort of fairly aggressively nod its nose down at the stall. But that is, that's something that can happen with an aeroplane like this occasionally. But yeah, that wing drop was just a little bit too aggressive. But it's so much better than the other Carenado aircraft that I tested, which basically just tip you upside down, that I'm really loath to complain about it. It's a big improvement, but it's not quite there. Sticking with the theme of handling, the ground handling, it just feels too light on the ground. It needs to have that weight. Pop the parking brake off. I know these are big 3-bladed propellers and they move a lot of air even at idle, but they would not be moving enough air to get the aeroplane rolling without the parking brake on at idle throttle. It just wouldn't happen. So I don't know what they can do to just kind of make it feel a little bit more resistive on the ground. It would really improve things in terms of the immersion. The next one is probably the biggest one of all, really, certainly for me. It's the single engine handling. Now, they've gone to the trouble of making of developing a system in this simulator which none of the default aeroplanes have, which is you feather the prop stops properly, you've got an animated propeller that looks really cool, and then you try it out and you fail the engine and you feather the prop and all of a sudden you just drop out the well, you don't drop out the sky, but you can't climb, you can't maintain altitude, you're just in a constant descent. And I have tried everything absolutely by the book numerous times. Feather the prop, and you saw me doing it. I closed the cowl flap on the in-op engine. I changed the operative engine to only half open cowl flap. We had max power, red lever full forward, blue lever full forward, and I was keeping it as close as I could to VOISE, which is 88 knots. I was also giving it that little 5-degree bank angle into the live engine as the POH suggests, and even with all of that, we were getting about a 50 feet per minute descent, or even more like maybe a sort of couple hundred feet per minute descent. That's it's really not good enough. This aeroplane is noted amongst light aircraft to be a great performer, to be fast, to be a great climber, and to be very safe on one engine because it's got plenty of reserve performance. Even with absolutely loaded down, with everything it could be loaded down with, this aircraft can still make, bear in mind book figures, and book figures are always a little bit on the pessimistic side, 400 feet per minute. I'd expect a nice shiny new aeroplane to be making, maybe 500 feet per minute, something like that, which is kind of what the DA42 can do in one engine. And the DA42 is similar. It's noted to have really good single engine handling, certainly the version that I'm familiar with the 175 horsepower engines. So to see this aeroplane just sort of steadily mushing towards the ground on one engine, I mean, it means you basically can't practice any of your engine failure after takeoff drills in this aeroplane. You can basically just simulate an engine failure at altitude and then just land with one engine. I mean, it handles well enough on one engine in terms of it steers well enough. The rudder trim works as you might imagine, and you can trim out the yaw. It just doesn't have enough power on one engine, which is really strange because it's pretty much perfect with two engines. It just seems like, I don't know, it just seems like there's not enough power there on one. I understand, the simulator is still kind of in its infancy and the flight model changes a lot from patch to patch. But I really hope there's something they can do to improve the single engine handling of the airplane, because it really cuts out a lot of the things you can do with a twin in a flight sim if you can't operate it on one engine. But yeah, I think maybe it's a bit of a tribute to how good the rest of the flight model is that this is just such a kind of standout downside to the aircraft. Moving away a little bit from the handling now, the last thing I'm going to talk about really in terms of negatives is the interior sounds. The engine sounds, they're just bland and way too quiet. Comparing it again, I always come back to this, but the Just Flight Arrow sounds really, really good inside, really realistic. The wind noise, the sounds even when you sort of crack the door and things like that. Like they've modelled that from the real aeroplane. They've gone out and they've taken the time to record all of those different sounds. And certainly in contrast to how good the external sounds are, you get inside this airplane, you can barely hear them, and they're just really bland. Once you're actually going, they're better. Once you're up in the air and you've got a decent RPM set. But drop the RPM down to like 2200, they're still a bit too quiet, to be perfectly honest. It sounds like you're wearing a noise cancelling headset, which of course in the real aeroplane you might very well be. But in this aeroplane, you really need to, in a sim aeroplane, you need to be able to hear what the aircraft would be like if you wasn't wearing a headset. And if you do want to simulate wearing a headset, there's an option in the Microsoft Flight Simulator audio options, so you can turn that on for yourself if you so wish. But yeah, that's a little bit disappointing. And that's it, really. So I'll leave you guys to form your own opinion on this aeroplane, whether you think it's worth it or not. Me, personally, I mean, this aircraft is $30, which is about £22. For what it is, I think that this is really, really good value. And even with the big thing about the single engine handling, I have still really enjoyed testing this aeroplane and playing around with it, and just going here and there in the flight sim and just flying it for fun. And honestly, there's not that many aeroplanes in this simulator that I would just go to and fly it around for fun. The Flying Iron Spitfire is one of them, the Just Flight Arrow is another, and now this. I mean, if Carenado decide to take this away now I've done the review, then I would probably go out and spend my own money to buy it, because I think it is really, really, honestly good value for money. I would go as far as to say that this is probably the best... Yeah, turn the engine off. This is probably the best add-on piston twin for Microsoft Flight Simulator right now. That's really quite a bold statement, but I certainly believe that it is worthy of that title. You're probably going to tell me no, you're talking out your backside, but just again, this is my personal opinion. I will leave you to make that decision yourselves. But I think for £21 or £22, $30, this is great value. It's a great fun aeroplane. It looks fantastic. It sounds great from the outside. And you can do loads and loads of different fun stuff with it in Flight Sim, and I think that's really great, and it enthuses me and makes me want to sort of fire Flight Sim up and go and fly around, which surely that should be the point of anything that you buy for it. It should enhance your experience in the sim, and that's certainly what this does for me. So without further ado, we'll leave it there. Please drop me a comment and let me know what you think of this aeroplane. Any suggestions or anything for future episodes, throw that in there. There are some pretty interesting aeroplanes coming up. Just going back to whether you think this is worth buying, maybe I should probably touch on this. There is a, if you're really into your study level stuff, your really, really highly detailed aeroplanes, there is a Cessna 310, I believe Milviz are coming out with fairly soon. So if you're in the market for a piston twin and you want something really, really study level, maybe wait for that. Obviously, we've got no idea what it's going to be like. But I think that they are probably going to the effort of making that very, very detailed. And I would hate for you to sort of spend your money on this and think, oh, well, you know, it's the best we're going to get for a while, when that is just around the corner. That said, I still wouldn't regret buying this, to be perfectly honest. I still think this stands up even against a potentially, you know, study level Cessna 310, because I really like the Seneca 5. I think it's a very cool aeroplane. So I certainly will be keeping this in my Flight Sim hangar. So anyway, yeah, like, comments, subscribe if you're enjoying what we do here, and hopefully I will see you next time. Goodbye.